morning. I have one question for Colleen and one for Gordon, if I have a bonus to those two questions. The question for Colleen is the following. Did you notice any connection between the level of opposition to dam removal and the river typology, the river style? So in relation to the fact that the appreciation in terms of landscape or recreation may be different?
Yes. For the most part, it may seem relatively obvious, but the most resistance to removal often came from dams that were in the center of town. They're urban, slightly more urban, even though the towns are quite small. So it has a lot to do with visibility, and it gets back to that idea of the perceptible realm, what people see every day. Having said that, occasionally there are examples of dams that are not in the center of town, and there's quite a bit of resistance, but certainly urban dams, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with how attractive the dam is, because some of them are quite unattractive or in disrepair, but still people are attached to them. So I would say that was the most...
So more the location than the river style, let's say.
I don't believe that we've seen that in New England so much. Most of the dams that have been taken out have been in the upper reaches of the watershed, so maybe that has something to do with it, but I would say no particular discernible pattern.
And very short question to Gordon. Do you have any experience of successful dam removal in case of polluted sediments accumulated?
That's a good question. The contaminated sediments are like the elephant in the room for dam removal. There is a history that goes back to the 1970s of people taking dams out without looking for sediment contamination. There was a dam in New York's, upstate New York, the Fort Edwards Dam, that had a large volume of PCB contaminated sediment. And when they took the dam out, they released that sediment, and it created an enormous toxic problem that extended for hundreds of kilometers. A slightly different example occurred in Montana, where sediment that had become contaminated from copper mines was also released, but it was less of a problem. The basic issue is if you have contaminated sediment, you cannot let the river have free access to it. You have to figure out what to do with it, either to remove it, to dredge it, to isolate it, but it is a real problem.
Merci pour ces premières questions. Y en a-t-il d'autres?
Thank you for the first questions. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Thank you. So this is a question for our two US speakers. In your countries, have you ever had lobbying issues, maybe aggressive lobbies by the hydropower producers? As we can see, sometimes people, climate skeptics who maybe would deny climate change. In France, we see part of the utilities, hydropower companies who try to have us think that dam removal would not have any ecological benefits. Have you encountered that? What would be the consequences if you have seen that in your country?
In the New England case, very often the hydropower advocates are, it's a little different. They're arguing for micro hydropower, even though it's often not feasible. So they use more of the green energy, clean energy argument. You do see very often, as part of the resistance to removing larger dams, the argument that hydropower is absolutely necessary for the economy and, again, sort of from an environmental perspective, and maybe a bit cynically on the part of hydropower companies. So, for example, on the Columbia rivers, their proposal to remove a number of dams in the upper reaches, but the argument is that the Northwest needs that hydropower. It's essential for the economy, and that it's the best option environmentally. So, do you see the hydropower industry sort of arguing for green power as a way to halt dam removals in any of the Northwest cases?
This is a good question. What I see happening is the power companies are primarily being driven by economics and in the Northwest. And so the issues around the environment or even green power are primarily a way of putting forward something that ultimately I think is an economic argument. So for example, there is a major effort to remove 4 large dams on the Klamath River. These are perfectly good hydropower dams. They produce, I forget what the megawattage is, but it's a lot. I mean, compared to everything I saw yesterday, where you are looking at small hydropower projects that produce 50 kilowatts, 100 kilowatts, these produce tens, if not hundreds of megawatts. These are big hydropower projects. What is driving them to consider dam removal is that it is getting too expensive to relicense the dams, given the environmental cost of maintaining fish and fish passage. And they do that balance, and if it doesn't look like it's going to be in their favor, then what they try to do is get the best deal they can, so that they don't have to assume all the costs of removing the dams. This is an interesting thing that happens, is that the power companies will turn around to the state or even to the federal government and say, wouldn't you like us to take this dam down? If you give us support, if you support us, we will move in that direction. So they kind of hold the dam hostage a little bit.
Merci à nos amis américains très sollicités dans vos questions, et vous avez raison, hein, c'est une façon aussi de profiter de leur...
Thank you to our US
Une dernière question peut-être avant...
presenters. A lot of questions for you. Do we have any more questions before the break?
Merci de vous présenter.
Please introduce yourself first. Martin Joanneau, Territorial Authority. I have a question for our US speakers as well. I have a question. I wanted to ask about the maps. Why are there such big differences in the map with a lot of dam removals? It looks like the Northwest is much more concerned by dam removals than the rest of the territory. Is that related to specific policies in each state? Or are there lobbying issues in some parts of the US as opposed to others? How do you explain the differences?
If you remember the map that both Colleen and I showed, the Pacific Northwest has some, but does not have most of the dam removals in the country. I think most of the dams are in the Northeast, in Colleen area, and that's just because the number of dams is much greater there. Keep in mind that most dams are small, fall in that small category. And there are many, many, many more small dams that have come out and are likely to come out than the large dams. The Pacific Northwest has a couple of factors that promote the dams being famous removals, if you will. The rivers are larger, generally. The fish issues are, in a sense, national scale issues. Everyone knows about the salmon issues. And so the removal of dams has a kind of almost iconic, it's a kind of iconic action that I think favors the Northwest as perhaps a more natural landscape than the Northeast. Well, what do you?
Yeah, I would agree that salmon and endangered fish drive a lot of dam removals in places like the Pacific Northwest. In New England, it has to do with politics as well, because we have very powerful local select boards, local governance. So while they can resist dam removals, they can also be very active in promoting dam removals. So people have a lot of power to remove a dam. They don't necessarily have to wait for any authority, and they're generally not productive. So they are, as in France, they're remnants very often of a past productive landscape. So it's just much easier to remove them, and there are 14,000 of them in New England. So I think there are political issues and environmental issues that explain the Northwest and the Northeast.
Merci, Colleen. Thank you to take your headphones, please, because I'm going to ask you a new question, but I trust our translators. If you don't mind, I will ask my question in French. Une question de nature.
I have a question. Yes, it is cultural. We saw on one of your pictures that you had a picture of Native Americans, tribe representatives. Do they play a specific role in the protests for river restoration in the north of the US? Do they play a specific role?
I actually have another research project on Native Americans and dam removal. And in the United States, the federal government is, and FERC, the Federal Energy Relicensing Commission, is required to consult with Native Americans on dam removals if they have treaty rights to a particular river. So Native Americans are involved in many of the removals that Gordon's worked with because of their treaty rights and endangered species. And in other cases, rivers have spiritual and cultural significance for tribes, and tribes can also access federal funds which can be used for dam removal. So there's the largest river restoration project in the Great Lakes region is actually being facilitated by the Grand Traverse Band of Chippewa and Ottawa Indians. They're removing 3 dams on the Boardman River and altering another one. And it's really their community which has pushed the dam removal. The Penobscot River, Penobscot Indians, the Elwha Dam in the Olympic Peninsula, the Elam tribe pushed that. The Klamath dams in Oregon are also the removal is being pushed by the Native Americans. So it's actually quite an interesting topic, and there are political, legal, cultural reasons that tribes can promote dam removal.
Thank you.